Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching War Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Russian diplomat Dmitry Peskov speaks on the impending Vitkov-Putin meet to be held in Moscow. The diplomat also speaks on India-Russia's defense ties and a potential $100 billion trade with India by 2030. As Russia-Ukraine peace talks gains momentum, U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and son-in-law Jared Kushner are to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow this week. Russian forces have claimed that they have captured the eastern Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk, which is a key logistics hub. However, Kyiv has not confirmed the Russian claims yet. White House defends U.S. attack on boat from Venezuela as lawful, as White House defends a U.S. admiral's decision to conduct multiple strikes on an alleged Venezuelan drug smuggling vessel starting from September, saying that he had Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's authorization. A diplomatic clash between China and Japan over recent remarks by Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi is heating up at the United Nations. Chinese Ambassador Fu Kong has sent a second letter to Secretary General Antonio Guterres while urging Tokyo to retract the earlier remarks. White House says that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has approved the second strikes on an alleged Venezuelan drug boat, but also clarified that he did not issue order to kill everyone on board. The European Central Bank has refused to backstop a $163 billion loan to Ukraine, with officials criticizing that the EU's plan to use frozen Russian assets would violate the bank's mandate. Taiwan opposition blocks $40 billion defense budget, prompting protests from ruling DPP, KMT and TPP say William Lai's government is seeking a blank check and demand details of procurement plans before proposal can be reviewed. Now we start this hour with Zelensky. According to recent updates, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has wrapped up his meeting with senior officials who recently held talks with U.S. negotiators on peace proposals. Zelensky has said that both sides have now refined a framework agreement first discussed in Geneva, with further progress made during their latest round of meetings in Florida. He has added that Ukraine wants greater participation from its European partners as the process moves forward. Russian President Vladimir Putin is expected to meet U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner in the Kremlin. While Zelensky has also said that he has directed his team to continue what he called the most constructive work possible as negotiations develop. Let's listen into what the delegations have shared.
Передаю вітання від американської сторони, від держсекретаря Рубіо, Стіва Віткофа, Джареда Кушнера, так як вони були представляли Сполучені Штати. Зустрічі після Женеви продовжені.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Mohammed Osman. He's an international relations expert, joins us live from Cairo. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed, for joining us again. Good to see you. Mr. Mohammed, what is your analysis? How do you analyze this situation, or how close are we to the peace between Russia and Ukraine with mediation efforts by U.S.?
Thank you for having me, Asuma. Always a pleasure to be with you. Greetings to you and to your audience. Of course, it is very hard to guess whether we are really close to a breakthrough in terms of reaching a peaceful settlement in Ukraine than we were, for example, about a year ago. Definitely, we are closer than we were a year ago because now we have a U.S. administration that is willing to engage in actual serious dialogue with Russia and to take the Russian concerns into account, not to make this a one-sided affair, and also that takes into account realities on the battlefield that needs to be placed properly in the equation while trying to approach a settlement, a realistic, workable settlement for the war in Ukraine. And we see that the process is moving forward. So far, there was a 28-point plan that angered the Europeans and the Ukrainians. a very substantive dialogue was held between Ukraine and its European allies and the United States as well, who turned from being a full ally to being an entity in the gray area, basically, something between an ally and a mediator. So, and through this dialogue, the last of which were the rounds of negotiations that took place in Miami, Florida, between a Ukrainian senior delegation and US delegation led by Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, it seems that certain understandings have been reached between the Ukrainians and the Americans. But now it remains for the Americans to present these proposals or amended proposals or revised proposals to the Russians. In a few hours or shortly, even Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will meet with President Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin in Moscow. And they are expected to present some sort of a framework for a deal officially to the Russians. In my opinion, Asuma, if this final version of the deal after the negotiations with the Ukrainians and with the Europeans does not have within its provisions certain guarantees that maintains Ukrainian neutrality and non-accession to NATO, and also Russia retaining control of the territories it occupied, and even maybe the withdrawal of the Ukrainians from what remains of the Donbass, about 15%, it's very likely that Russia would flatly reject this proposal. But of course, this will complicate matters even further. President Zelensky is desperate in order to derail the current process, because he sees that if this process goes into motion fully, it will mean that this will be a settlement that will be completely on the expense of Ukraine. And he is right in many regards, or partially at least, when he considers it from this the viewpoint. And also it would be the political suicide or the definitive end of the political career of President Zelensky, whose government is now facing corruption charges. Andriy Yermak was forced to resign and is under scrutiny due to the latest corruption scandal. So basically, the situation within Ukraine itself has become rather unstable. So if Ukraine also gives excessive concessions as part of a settlement with the Russians that can be read as basically a surrender, then of course it will be catastrophic for Ukraine and also catastrophic for European security. It seems that a Russian dream has been realized, driving a wedge between Europe and the United States. And now the United States, which is the leader of NATO, is mediating between NATO and Russia, which is, it's laughable, it's farcical, and at the same time it's quite interesting, because now it means that the US probably is not as committed to European security or so-called transatlantic security as it once was. So the Europeans are concerned and the Ukrainians are concerned, and the Russians now are in a very well-leveraged position to dictate their conditions at this point. Can you hear me, Asuma? I can't hear you.
Hello. Okay.
I can't hear you.
Okay. Wait, let me ask my team. Should I ask my question again? Okay. So what do you think, what is needed to enforce the security for Ukraine?
I think that Ukraine has to be presented with certain security guarantees. And I believe that the US plan, in its original form at least, will provide that there will be some sort of form of security guarantees that will be provided by the United States. The United States said in the proposal that was presented, at least in the first draft, that in case Russia attacks Ukraine again, then certain security guarantees are there in place that will ensure that there will be a coordinated quote-unquote military response from NATO. It's not tantamount to Article 5, of course. It's not a mutual defense pact. However, it does mean that probably the NATO will restore all of its funneling of arms and equipment to Ukraine once again, and also that economic sanctions will be immediately reinstated if the Russians undertake such an endeavor. These are security guarantees. They are much weaker than what Ukraine wants. Zaluzhny, the other day, former commander of the Ukrainian military and ambassador of Ukraine to the United Kingdom, said that part of the security guarantees should be the deployment of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. And of course, this is never going to happen. Russia's never going to allow that, because that was the whole purpose of the war in Ukraine, to prevent any deployment of Western troops on Ukrainian territory that might threaten the Russian heartland. So I believe that these are the best security guarantees that can be provided as part of a workable solution. And of course, there is always the other option, to continue the war. However, the continuation of the war means that Ukraine will be on the receiving end of a disastrous defeat, because on the ground, on the battlefield, Russia is advancing. It has the battlefield initiative. It has more firepower, much more firepower. It has a stronger industrial base than all of Europe in terms of military industry, and also it has a lot more resources, and it has alliances and partnerships with the global south and China and India that allow it to continue this war for an open-ended amount of time, probably. So this is a war Ukraine cannot really win.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Mohammed Osman for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we stay on this topic. Now, moving on, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his wife Olena Zelenska have arrived in Dublin for a one-day state visit, the first by Ukrainian President and First Lady to visit Ireland. They were welcomed at the presidential residence Aras on Uachtaráin by Irish President Kathleen Connolly. During the visit, Zelensky was briefed on peace talks with Russia following recent meetings between Ukrainian and US negotiations in Florida. The Irish government is expected to approve an extra $137 million in aid for Ukraine, including $110 million in non-lethal military support and $27 million for urgent energy needs. Zelensky will address both houses of the Irish Parliament and attend the Ireland-Ukraine Economic Forum, highlighting the strong ties and ongoing support between these two countries. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Mohammed Osman. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed Osman, for staying with us. Now looking at this, what is the timing and significance of this first-time visit by Ukrainian President suggests amid ongoing war and ongoing mediation efforts?
As I said, Asuma,
Yes.
President Zelensky is desperate for garnering support from his allies, and therefore he went on his second European tour or European trip in 2 weeks. He met with President Macron about a few weeks back, and then he went to Paris once again and met with Macron yesterday. And then he went ahead also and headed to Dublin, Ireland, in order to strengthen EU support for Ukraine at this point. However, I see this move of desperation. It will not yield much, because Europe does not really have much more to offer at this point. Assume Europe now feels threatened. Europe's military industrial output is unable to put up with the military industrial output of Russia. They cannot supply Ukraine with the necessary weapons so that they would maintain the front line and prevent Russian advances, especially in the absence or the near absence of more US weapons shipments. Now the new US weapons shipment have to be bought by Europe from the United States and transferred to Ukraine. So this adds more of a financial burden on Europe, and the biggest European economies like Germany and France and Italy, these economies are struggling at the moment and are approaching what some economists might argue recession or a near recession crisis. So they are in no shape or form able to bankroll Ukraine much longer on their own without US support. And the same applies to Ireland, of course, which is a small country, not really a great, gigantic economy in the European Union, not really that much of an influential actor in the European Union, which shows the extent of the desperation of President Zelensky at this point. The French, on the other hand, and the Germans, they are now, and especially Germany, is focused on increasing their own military spending to increase their own military capabilities, because they believe they might be on the receiving end of a Russian war of aggression somewhere near 2029 or 2030. I believe, of course, that is a sheer exaggeration. I do not believe that Russia would ever attack the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. However, it does seem that Europe now does believe, or the European governments do believe, that they might be directly threatened with Russian aggression, especially that Russia has escalated lately with the deployment of drones to violate the airspace of several European countries. Russia denied that. However, most of the evidence points to Russia that they are carrying out these provocations to test the limits and also the air defense capabilities of the Europeans.
Yes.
So all of these are indicators that the situation in Europe is about to go towards a downwards spiral. Therefore, the Europeans now are much more concerned with their own security than the actual survival of Ukraine.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Mohammed Osman for joining us as an international relations expert from Cairo. Thank you very much. Now, we stay in the region. Belgian police have carried out major raids targeting the European External Action Service in Brussels and the College of Europe in Bruges as part of an investigation led by the European Public Prosecutor's Office. Authorities say 3 suspects were detained in connection with alleged fraud involving EU-funded training for junior diplomats. The probe focuses on a tender for a 9-month program run in 2021 and 2022, which was awarded to the College for Europe. According to reports, the former EEAS chief, Federica Mogherini, have been arrested in the fraud probe. Raids were carried out at several EEA's buildings and the college and private homes. The College of Europe has declined to comment, and the EU Diplomatic Service has not responded. A European Commission spokesperson has also offered no comment on the reported detentions. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical expert, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us again. Good to see you. Mark, what are we to make of this news that has just come out, as a lot of things are still under the clouds?
Good to be with you. What am I to make of it? Well, what a surprise, I could say cynically. I believe 100%. That this was an academy that was set up in 2020. But the thing is, within the whole European Union project, as it then came from the common market to then the European Union project, where you've got 26 commissioners that decide what to do and then tell members of the European Parliament, this is what you are to vote on, as the members of the European Parliament cannot bring legislation to that Parliament. Why am I saying this? Well, back in 2000, if memory serves me correct, Mr. Van Buitenen wrote a book called Blowing the Whistle, about then his concerns as someone who was working within for the European Union, assessing budgets, etc. He was concerned about fraud. I believe that in 1999, the previous commission to that had resigned en masse. And then, as a then commissioner, Mr. Neil King had come, who was there, was then overseeing new regulations, a legal system, a legal framework where you could keep an eye on where the money has gone. So in regard to fraud, in my own humble opinion, there is nothing new in raising questions of where money goes, how things are set up within the European Union. We could also say, even recently within the whole COVID-19 incidents from 2019-20, where this whole thing of PPE contracts, vaccine contracts, are then given to corporations, and van der Leyen has been questioned about that, and needs to be questioned more about that. So this is nothing new. However, as we all know, when contracts are given publicly, it's how those contracts, public service, are then given. There has to be a strict rules in how that is conducted. In other words, they are to be given without favor. They're not contracts that should be given to their friends or their mates. There should be proper processes put in place for people to be able to bid for them. People be able to bid where they don't have insider knowledge or anything like that. So laying out all that case, we have to see what is going to unfold from this. Is this distracting from someone else, something else, as I can cynically say?
Right.
The whole thing within the EU, the globalness of it, its elite is running, it's wanting to be influential. The huge question in regard to is it democratic is an ongoing thing. I would then point the way to people want to read a good book about that. It's called The History of Europe and the Great Deception, written by Richard North and Christopher Booker. There are many, many questions that other also MEPs have written about this in regard to budget, fraud, and how it then conducts itself. I am not the first person to raise this. There are many greater than me, as I've just pointed out, that have raised this question constantly. Asuma.
Yes, thank you very much for shedding the light into history and the book, also sharing that book. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Mark Sutherland. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now moving on to France, France's government spokesperson Maud Brigion has said on Wednesday that the vote on the Social Security financing bill should not be seen as an endorsement of the government. She has urged the Socialists, Greens, and Republicans to vote based on the bill itself as the Assembly reviews it again. Brigion has also addressed a growing controversy, accusations that the government planned to create a state-issued media label to clarify press outlets. Let's listen in.
Ensuite, un autre sujet avec une polémique qui a fleuri ces derniers jours et ces dernières heures dans le débat public et dans le débat médiatique, pour rappeler simplement, et le président de la République a eu l'occasion de le faire en début de Conseil des ministres, qu'il n'y a pas de label d'État et encore moins de ministère de la vérité. Le président de la République n'a jamais affirmé cela et n'a jamais tenu ses propos. Il y a des initiatives prises par la presse, portées notamment dans les États généraux de l'information et évoquées récemment par la présidente du groupe de presse EBRA lors d'un échange public avec le président de la République qui s'est tenu dans les Vosges et que chacun peut visionner. La réponse du président de la République a été claire et il l'a redit ce matin lors du Conseil des ministres. Ces initiatives prises encore une fois par des groupes de presse ne sont pas absurdes, mais n'ont en aucun cas vocation à être portées par le gouvernement. Donc non, le gouvernement ne va pas créer tel ou tel label destiné à la...
Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mark, for staying with us. As we were just talking about strict rules for money, now looking at this, how could the framing of the Social Security financing bill vote in France affect public perception of the government's legitimacy and political mandate? What political challenges might arise then?
Unfortunately, I couldn't see the translation of the comments made in French at that particular time.
Yes.
And the reason why I'm smirking and smiling is because, sadly, this whole thing across the European Union in a variety of governments, including French, etc., is that people are not happy with their governments at all, how the governments conduct themselves, what they're doing with money, with the finances of particular countries. Hence why, understandably, what they're then called populist movements then rise, because people want true democracy and they want accountability from the people that they are then given to vote for. Hence why I would say that voting rates are going through the floor, because they're looking at who is available and thinking, I don't particularly want to vote for them. This is constantly about credibility all the time. And of course, the other concern is how they then put that message over, where they put that message over, particularly, as you say, within the media, and how that is then controlled and what accountability they then have. People are feeling across Europe and within the UK, and I'm not saying that we are not members of the European Union now, but people are feeling very, very disaffected with how their governments are accountable and how they then and they conduct themselves, in the fact that they are then voted in. They are not doing what the people want them to do, or they're bringing in other policies that are not in their manifestos in the first place. Asuma.
Yes, and lastly, what are the potential political consequences for the ruling party if the media labeling controversy escalates during the Assembly's review of the bill?
Well, if we're talking within France, as it's been said by other commentators greater than me, you are then looking at the fact that Macron has got to hold three sort of blocks of thinking constantly together. Now, if they're going to put a policy through that is then restricting media, controlling output, then in various quarters within France, they're not going to be particularly happy about that. What I also find rather interesting, of course, other countries around the world have put these things in place. If you look at Canada, you look at what you can then access on social media or not, it is then behind a particular wall of control. We've just seen that within policy, within having the online safety bill within the UK. There are things that you found access to quickly, you can't find that. So if we believe in free speech, I certainly do, but unfortunately it seems that politicians in my own country and elsewhere, with other European countries, don't. Then this is deeply concerning in regard to that. So I would say Macron, what's he now on his sixth prime minister?
Yes.
This will mean, and he's also got presidential elections that are it's not going to be far away and looming. This is going to be should be of a deep concern for him, especially as populist movements, as they would call Marie Le Pen, etc. Then people are very frustrated and rising, and actually want the democracy that they vote for in the, I think now, the Fifth Republic to actually work. Asuma.
Yes, 100%. With that, I would like to thank Mark Sutherland for joining us as a geopolitical commentator from London. Thank you very much. Now, moving the focus to Qatar. Qatar has said that it hopes Israel and Hamas can shift quickly into the next phase of Gaza peace plan and talks. Officials say the focus now is on issues complicating the progress, including Hamas fighters still in tunnels beyond the Yellow Line, where Israeli forces pulled back after the October ceasefire. Qatar, the United States, and Egypt brokered the truce that paused 2 years of fighting under the first phase. Hamas was expected to return all remaining hostages, but 2 bodies are still missing. Qatar says the devastation in Gaza has slowed recovery efforts, but adds this should not block political progress. The second phase, backed by the United Nations, calls for an Israeli withdrawal, a temporary Gaza authority, and an international stabilization force. Hamas is also expected to disarm, a condition that it continues to reject. Let's listen in.
It's a miracle that we have gotten to this point. We only have one body left to hand over. As we have always said, the logistical situation in Gaza would certainly make it difficult to reach this result, but we have reached this result right now, and I think, as we have stated, that this should never have been, a hamper in front of moving to stage 2, and we think that we are working very closely, of course, and we think that we should be pushing the parties to stage 2 very soon.
Now we move on to Lebanon. Pope Leo has wrapped up his 3-day visit to Lebanon with a powerful appeal for peace and justice, as he met families of the Beirut port blast and called for an end to hostilities across the region. The Pope visited the site of the 2020 explosion that killed 218 people and wounded thousands. Earlier, tens of thousands gathered at Beirut's waterfront for a mass that became the central moment of his trip. The Pope urged an end to attacks and escalation as Lebanon contends with spillover from the Gaza conflict and widespread fears of renewed clashes between Israel and Hezbollah. The visit also came at a time of deep economic strain, with Lebanon hosting 1 million Syrian and Palestinian refugees and still recovering from years of financial collapse. Pope Leo received an official farewell at Beirut's Rafik Hariri International Airport, where President Joseph Aoun thanked him for his message and his calls for peace. The Pope's tour of Lebanon, the second stop in his first overseas trip as Catholic leader, ended with a clear appeal for regional stability, human dignity, and an end to hostilities. Let's listen into what he has shared.
Presidents of Parliament, the Council of Ministers, departing is often more difficult than arriving. We have spent time together, and in Lebanon, this spirit of encounter is contagious. While arriving in your country meant gently entering into your culture, leaving this land means carrying you in my heart. Thus, we are not leaving each other. Rather, having met, we will move forward together.
That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
What we can do